As quite a few of you guys had predicted, Terence Crawford becomes the first guy to stop Shawn Porter and retain his WBO World Welterweight title in the 10th round. Now, this was actually a real good fight, and most fights that Shawn Porter is involved in with other high level fighters turn out to be good fights because Shawn Porter fights with so much passion. He fights with aggression. He uses his legs early. That's typical of Shawn Porter. But as the rounds go on, he tends to get more and more aggressive, hitting guys wherever he can hit him in the body, in the shoulders, in the head. Now, he wasn't really landing much clean in this fight early on, but there was a period, I want to say around round 8, round 9, where he started catching Terence Crawford with right hands over the top, which Crawford was able to take without any issue, really. Crawford, from early in the fight, was landing real nice lead and also check right hooks. So with Shawn Porter rushing in, normally fighters will try and catch him with the backhand. Either whether they're orthodox or southpaw, they'll try and catch him with their backhand coming in, an uppercut, a straight shot, etc. But Shawn Porter is trained for that so much that he's actually quite good at evading, especially early on in the fight when he rushes in. He's quite good at evading the backhand. Well, Terence Crawford concentrated on throwing the lead hand as a hook because it comes outside your field of vision and it's also closer to your opponent. See the lead hand here. You don't have to throw it from all the way here where his eyes are looking at you when he's coming in. This one, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to slip a jab. No, he'll turn that jab into a hook and he'll catch you coming in. Obviously, I'm talking about Terence Crawford here. So that was catching Shawn Porter over and over again. Real nice shot from Bud Crawford out of southpaw stance. And even though Shawn Porter was making it tough for him, making it a physical fight and landing shots here and there, I did feel as though Terence Crawford was ahead going into the later rounds of this fight, particularly with that check right hook, landing it pretty consistently, especially early on in the bout. And he did quite a good job at matching Shawn Porter on the inside when it comes to the rough stuff. Shawn Porter tried to rough him up, but Bud Crawford showed a good ability to control the clinch. A lot of fighters against Shawn Porter, they look all out of sorts when he starts doing his Tasmanian devil impression on the inside, flailing arms all over the place, shrugging you off when you're trying to clinch him. But there was moments when Terence Crawford was actually up against the ropes and Porter was, on him like a harbor shark, and Crawford was able to wrap him up and actually turn him. So he showed good ability, good physical strength and ability on the inside to control the unrushing Shawn Porter. Of course, there were moments, as I've said earlier, where Porter was able to get arms free. He was able to start flailing away, and he did manage to catch Bud Crawford over the top, but nothing that really troubled him. Crawford was talking to Shawn Porter throughout the bout. Whenever Porter would have a little bit of success, Crawford would want to, return the favor. Right? He'd want to come straight back at him and land his own shots, and he was walking Porter down in those moments, which was a little reminiscent of when Keith Thurman fought Shawn Porter, because when Porter would back Thurman up and land some shots, Thurman would then come rushing back forward at him to try and get him back. But with Terence Crawford, he's just a more skillful fighter than Keith Thurman, a better technical fighter. Thurman is very athletic, probably more athletic than Bud Crawford is, but not as technical. And therefore, Crawford's very slick on the inside, knowing how to get away from shots and take the sting off shots and counter very quickly. And obviously we know that he can switch hit seamlessly. So yeah, he incorporated all his skills in this fight. And as the rounds wore on, after a decent period for Shawn Porter, I want to say around the 8th, Crawford got back in control. And finally in the 10th, he caught Shawn Porter coming in. This time it was with the backhand rather than the lead hand. The first knockdown, I believe, it was the backhand. Shawn Porter went down. He was very angry with himself. He got up. In fact, which was it? No. I think it was the second knockdown where he was really angry with himself, wasn't it? Or was it the first? Because one of the knockdowns, he was literally punching the canvas in frustration at the fact that he'd been caught like that. Perhaps he felt like it was a real close fight, and maybe he had a chance of winning on the cards if he had a strong finish. But when you suffer a knockdown like that late, yeah, it's gonna seriously affect the the way the fight's going in terms of the judging. So he was frustrated. But anyway, the first knockdown was from the backhand, and the second knockdown, I believe, was from a combination of shots, but I think it was mainly the right hook. Shawn Porter went down. He was punching the canvas. He gets up. He doesn't look out of it, a little bit wobbly, but we've seen Shawn Porter go down before and get up and survive fights. Gets up, and his dad throws in the towel, or he waves, from the ring apron to indicate that he's pulling his son out of the fight. Now, a lot of people didn't like the stoppage. A lot of people felt like it was premature. But on the flip side, Kenny Porter is Shawn's dad. He loves his son, and he knows his son better than anybody. So maybe he saw something there which we might not have seen. Some sign there that all was not well with Shawn and that he could have ended up getting knocked out properly. And perhaps his dad wanted to save him from that. But there is another school of thought out there, particularly after watching the post-fight interview with Kenny Porter and Shawn Porter in the ring. Kenny Porter, throughout Shawn's career, has always come across like a drill sergeant to me. Like he has trained Shawn Porter to be a private, and Kenny's the drill sergeant, and the son just obeys whatever the dad says. From the outside looking in, it appears to be that type of relationship where Shawn isn't really his own man, but he's still under the command and under the control of his dad. Now, I'm not here to judge, that from a moral perspective, but there's a school of thought out there which says that based upon what Kenny Porter said in the post-fight interview, where in front of Shawn, he said that Shawn didn't train the way that he wanted him to train during camp. And they live across the road from each other. Again, that could be an indication of how potentially controlling Kenny Porter is, that he lives across the road from his son. Look, there are lots of families that are very tight-knit. There's nothing wrong with a tight-knit family. But Kenny's just always come across as a very overbearing, controlling father. And perhaps it's worked for the best for most of Shawn's life. But there are positives and negatives, pluses and minuses to everything, right? And so in the post-fight interview, Kenny, based upon what he said, almost seemed like he wanted to shame his son Shawn for not obeying him during training camp and not training the way he wanted him to train. And because he'd maybe broken away, I don't know if he was training with somebody else a bit more or just not doing what Kenny wanted him to do. Is that part of the reason why Kenny stopped the fight, to punish his son for disobeying him? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. And certainly there's a school of thought out there which says that may be what happened. So I don't know. But after the fight, Shawn Porter announced his retirement. Now, he's had a long career, been in a lot of tough fights. Maybe he's just tired of the game. Again, if we stick to that school of thought whereby there's some type of maybe tension between Shawn Porter and his dad, maybe Shawn Porter's just had enough of the overbearing dad routine for all these years, particularly the way that Kenny talked to him in the ring after the fight, saying that Shawn didn't train the way I wanted him to, and, all this kind of thing. Maybe Shawn's thinking, you know what, I'm going to retire. Is that his way of punishing his dad, getting his dad back? Or is that his way of maybe retiring for a year and then try and come back without his dad as his trainer? I don't know. But anyway, I'm not saying that what I've just described is the case, but it's certainly an interesting thing to contemplate, a possibility. Either way, it was a good performance by Terence Crawford. He stopped Shawn Porter. And you know what? It was funny during the post-fight press conference to see Terence Crawford asked about his promotional situation while he was sitting next to Bob Arum. And, he was asked about the Errol Spence fight. And he very candidly said, well, and I'm paraphrasing, Bob couldn't get me the Errol Spence fight when I was with him. So now that I'm no longer with him, he's probably still not going to be able to get me the Spence fight. He was quite candid. And it's good to see him being like that and talking that way in front of Arum, because Arum is so disrespectful to many people, but even his own fighters. He talks to them in a disrespectful way. And respect is something which is reciprocal. If somebody's going to be disrespectful towards you and they're supposed to be providing you a service, then really and truly, not that what Terence said was disrespectful, but of course he was just being open and frank and candid about the fact that he don't need Bob, he's moving on from Bob. And I'm glad that he is, because realistically, and this isn't necessarily Bob Arum's fault, but realistically, he's not going to get that Errol Spence fight unless he's with PBC. Or perhaps he can be a free agent and do a deal, like Canelo has done a deal with PBC for the Caleb Plant fight. Maybe Terence Crawford can do something like that for the Errol Spence fight, where he says, okay, I'll do a 1-fight deal or a 2-fight deal with you and keep it pushing after that. So, yeah, best thing for Terence Crawford. And I did a video, obviously, about this whole Terence Crawford moving on from Bob Arum's situation based upon what Teddy Atlas had said. And from what Teddy Atlas said, he seemed to suggest or imply that Crawford's contract hadn't necessarily expired, but he had some type of legal ground to, break away from that contract because Bob hadn't delivered him a certain fight, I guess the Errol Spence fight. Whereas the stuff I'm seeing online now, based upon what Crawford said in the post-fight interview or the press conference, is more that actually his contract has expired. Well, whatever the case may be, it's good that he's now leaving Bob Arum, and hopefully we get to see this Errol Spence fight, because these guys ain't getting any younger. Errol Spence hasn't been particularly active, has he? He had that Danny Garcia fight. So, yeah, we need to get that fight on sooner rather than later. And from what I've seen of both guys recently, you would imagine, or I would imagine, that Terence Crawford has got a bit more mileage left in him than Errol Spence. Errol Spence did very well. I was very impressed in the Danny Garcia fight. I don't like the inactivity from Errol Spence, and he still wasn't 100% in the Garcia fight. You could tell his body didn't look quite right. The coordination wasn't quite right. And even though he beat the brakes off Garcia, that wasn't the best Errol Spence. And will we ever see the best Errol Spence again? Right now, if they were to fight, let's say in 4 months' time, I'd be picking Terence Crawford, personally. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. And, you can compare their performances against Shawn Porter. Errol Spence fought Shawn Porter several years ago now, right? Was it 2-3 years ago? And many would argue that Shawn Porter was fresher and better then than he is now. So, I can see, and I did mention this before the fight, that if Crawford does do a better job on Porter than Spence did, people are going to try and detract from it by saying, well, Porter's not quite what he used to be. And perhaps that's a valid criticism, But Porter, to me, still looked like he had quite a lot left in the tank. There was still energy there. There was still physical strength there. It's just that he didn't bring anything new to the table. Terence Crawford has seen, I'm sure, many Shawn Porter fights. He knew exactly how to prepare for the guy. So it was the same old Shawn Porter routine, and Terence Crawford was able to figure it out. But again, that's also an interesting thing given his decision to retire. When you see a fighter that still has so much energy in there, like, are you really going to retire now? Maybe he will, because it's not just about having the physical strength and energy to continue. It's mental. It's whether you're still enjoying what you're doing. And maybe Shawn Porter, particularly after losing the way he did getting stopped, and he's a guy with a lot of pride who's never been stopped before, maybe he felt like, you know what? This is the time to call it a day. Once I start getting stopped, I got to hang him up, Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about Terence Crawford's performance and where he goes from here. And also, let me know what you guys think about the whole situation between Shawn Porter and his dad. The stuff his dad said during the post-fight interview, was it out of order? Was it the right thing to say? Was it the wrong thing to say? What do you think about that relationship between father and son? Do you think... See, this is one of the things in boxing. is that back in the 90s and the 80s, there was this whole stigma about father son fighter trainer relationships in boxing. But over the past few years, we've seen a lot more of it. And many of these father son relationships have been fruitful. You know, the son's gone on to achieve a lot of great things. So they've kind of had a resurgence, these father son relationships. Back in the days, of course, you had Roy Jones Jr. couldn't get along with his dad and went his own way and became an all-time great and what have you. So, and there were these father-son relationships that never quite worked out. Is Kenny Porter, Shawn Porter, a father-son relationship that is past its expiry date, its sell-by date, from a boxing sense? I'm not talking about their personal relationship as father and son, but I mean their professional relationship. Is it past its expiry date? Does Shawn actually need to stand on his own 2 feet? A guy well into his 30s, but the dad is still acting like a drill sergeant and all this kind of stuff. Is it what Shawn Porter needs at this stage? You guys let me know what you think in the comments below.